A lot of times when you're trying to profile edge rushers, especially 3-4 outside linebackers for the NFL level, you're looking for certain traits or characteristics, and you're hoping those guys have those special traits and characteristics. Perhaps, arguably, the most important trait or characteristic that a 3-4 edge rusher can have is that explosive burst off of the edge, that quickness to be able to get off of the ball and to be able to get low and bend the edge and wreck the pocket that way. It's something that Von Miller is going to probably end up in the Hall of Fame because of that trait. Now, granted, he could do a lot of other things, and boy, going back to the 2011 draft, I was also wrong about him. He's one of the biggest misses I could ever think of. Um, so I always keep that in mind when I'm evaluating edge rushers is do they have a special trait or characteristic, or do they do something that can really set them apart? Do they have something that can really help them to stand out? And when you look at Tim Williams from Alabama, the one thing that you notice for a guy that's not all that big, about 6'3", maybe 235 pounds, is this dude can fly. He can explode off of the snap. He can explode off of the line of scrimmage. And many times you saw at Alabama over the past couple of years where he got to the quarterback and the offensive tackle was barely able to get a paw on him because this dude could just absolutely fly off of the edge. At times, Tim Williams was an incredibly fun watch because of that explosive burst off of the edge, his ability to consistently bend the edge a lot of times without even having to do anything else other than just fly to the football. You know, we're not talking bending the edge in a 7 to 8 yard window. We're talking about in a 4 to 6 yard window where he can actually get to the quarterback when that quarterback is playing out of the shotgun or maybe out of a 5-step drop. Tim Williams' burst and explosiveness when you pop on the tape for Alabama for him stands out significantly, stands out big time. And you see the possibility, the potential of what type of production he could have just merely off of that first step. And I think when you look at a guy like Tim Williams, this is why so many people have been so high on him and mocking him high throughout the whole draft process. But you have to be careful because that one trait or characteristic, can be enough for guys to get by. But there are other elements to the game. There are other things that are in play and other things that truly matter, especially when it comes to determining whether or not you're going to spend a first-round pick on a guy. And when I look at Tim Williams, I just don't see a first-round talent for a variety of reasons. Now, granted, your number one responsibility as an edge rusher is to be able to rush the edge and rush it effectively. And Tim Williams can relatively consistently do that, in large part because of his burst off of the edge. It makes him very dangerous on stunts, and if you want to even put him inside some and blitz him there, he's got a deadly spin move when you take into account that great explosiveness and burst off of the edge. Now you throw in an incredibly deadly spin move that I wish, frankly, he used more. He could be absolutely deadly. He's got decent fluidity of his hips to be able to adjust on the move, in part that really allows him to help bend the edge. But even with the lack of refinement in terms of secondary pass rush moves, this is a guy that you could see even coming into the league right away as a situational edge rusher, on the football field that would be able to produce and generate some pressure off of the edge. But you're also talking about a guy at Alabama that played around a lot of defensive talent over the past few years, a guy that was adequate against the run, but frankly was utilized in a role where he was almost primarily a pass rush specialist. So it's easy to come flying off the edge with that great burst and explosive quick step that he has if you're only playing a certain percentage of your team's defensive snaps. And sometimes maybe you look at a guy like this and you say, there's a reason he was playing in more of a situational type role. Now, I'm not saying that Williams couldn't end up being more at the NFL level. It's curious that he was utilized in this way at Alabama. And you also have to be careful, as with all Alabama defensive players, it can be a tough evaluation because you're sitting there and wondering about some of the history of Alabama players when they go to the NFL. You have some guys that become studs, but then you have some other guys that seems like they peaked at Alabama and they kind of bust out because they get broken down, they get beaten down, and they've gotten coached to their maximum potential. Furthermore, again, playing around so much other talent, does that talent allow him to do the one or two things that he does really, really well and he doesn't have to do anything else? That way it allows him to shine, but it masks the fact that he's far from a complete football player, and he is. Tim Williams is far from a complete football player. He's one of those guys that when you pop on the film, he does stand out. He plays hard relatively consistently, but again, how much easier is it to play hard when you're only playing a certain percentage of your defense's snaps? He's got incredible burst off of the edge, but again, it's easy to have that explosiveness all the way through to the fourth quarter if you're only playing half or 60% of your team's snaps. I think when you look at Tim Williams, you can see a guy with massive potential. But similar to guys like Randy Gregory and so on, you can see some of that potential. And I would argue that Tim Williams has a lot more pure edge rush, pass rush potential than a Randy Gregory did coming out of Nebraska in 2015. But similar baggage in terms of off the field. A guy that had academic issues in high school, suspended in 2014 for a violation of team rules. He was arrested on a gun charge in September of 2016. He's reportedly failed multiple drug tests at Alabama. So you start to wonder with a guy like this, it's a myriad of issues. He's getting suspended for a game here. He's getting arrested here. It's pretty well known, has some drug issues and has failed multiple drug tests. And thank God he played at Alabama, where they don't worry themselves about trivial shit like the law, because it's all about making the college football playoff. You hear me? Roll Tide! Win if you can, lose if you must, always cheat. If you're not cheating, you're not trying. But in all seriousness, when you look at a guy like this, you see a guy that didn't play, a large percentage of his team's snaps. I mean, he played a majority of the team snaps overall on defense, but there were a lot of plays that he was off, and he always seemed better utilized in a situational type of role. How effective can he be at the NFL level at 235 pounds as a run defender? Furthermore, at 235 pounds, is he going to be a guy similar to Jarvis Jones? Now, granted, Tim Williams is far more explosive off the edge of than Jarvis Jones ever was coming out of Georgia. But you look at a guy like this, and you see guys like 235 pounds, and you really wonder if they can hold up on the edge. Now, sometimes they can, but sometimes they don't. So that's got to be a concern, that lack of size. The fact that he's beaten so many people at the college level just flying off of the edge. What happens when he actually faces offensive tackles with feet and the ability to move their feet at the NFL level? What's he going to be able to do? Is he going to be stonewalled? Is he going to be a guy that has that one fluke sack in a game, but then you don't get a lot of other contribution out of him? Again, I don't think he was terrible in coverage in the few times you saw him. I see some potential there, but is he going to contribute that much in coverage? How much is he going to contribute as a run defender? Furthermore, what's most important to me is, can you actually count on this guy to be on the football field for you on a consistent basis? Perhaps the number one most important trait for any draft pick, in particular a first-round draft pick, is the ability of availability. Whether that be staying healthy or keeping your nose clean off the field. And Tim Williams has demonstrated significant issues with keeping his nose clean off the field. Now look, I hope the kid figures it out, and I hope he ends up reaching the potential that he has, that I think is very massive. But from my money, from my standpoint, any team thinking about taking Tim Williams in the first round is taking a major roll of the dice that in a draft class that is frankly this good just isn't necessary. Furthermore, he's not nearly a complete enough football player to really be entertaining the thought of taking him in the first round. And then when you factor in all the off-the-field risks, I wouldn't even want to touch him with a day two pick if it was anywhere in the second round or the early to mid portion of round 3. And you can see my final grade for him is an 80.5. I've got him as a late third round pick. And a large reason for that is when it comes down to dependability and durability, in particular in this case, the dependability part, what good is the talent going to do if he can't keep the pipe out of his fucking mouth? I think it's a fair question. And when you look at guys like Randy Gregory and Josh Gordon, some of these other guys that have had some trouble with marijuana and other substances, it doesn't matter how much talent they do or don't have. If they get suspended and they can't play, Martavis Bryant, another one, what does it matter? And that's the thing with Tim Williams at the end of the day. This is the type of guy that if I'm sitting there in the first round, I'm sitting there in the second round, even if I have a need for an edge rusher, I think I could find other talented players that are much more reliable. I don't think Tim Williams is worth a chance until at least the third round, based off of his history and based off of his pathetically poor performance off the field. Why the hell would you want to risk big-time money on a guy who might spend half of his time in the league on the suspended list?